We're looking at people of faith, biblical folks. We dealt with the Old Testament first and looked at some of the characters that in different ways demonstrated faith and examples that we can follow. We've been looking at the Gospels, which meant we're talking about people who've encountered Jesus Christ in some way. And we looked at the centurion and how he demonstrated faith by assuming that Jesus could heal from a distance. His word was enough, just like the centurion's word is enough. And we talked about Peter and how Peter showed a lack of faith, lack of dedication, and yet Jesus still kind of restored him and gave him a job to do. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to look at Zacchaeus. And we all know Zacchaeus was what?
Short.
A wee little man. Short. In fact, you could almost say
a wee little man was he.
A wee little man was he. So we know that about Zacchaeus. And as we deal with Zacchaeus, I'm going to encourage us to take a perspective, the perspective of people in the crowd as they're seeing what's going on, because faith sometimes involves us. You know, we demonstrate faith. We either have it or we don't, and we trust to varying degrees. And that changes depending on the situation. But we're also observers of other people. And sometimes we make assumptions about other people and about their dedication that may not be accurate, that may not be true. But we still do it, and what we assume kind of shapes what we end up doing or how we end up reacting. And so we'll look at that a little bit. And that's sort of what the woman was working with in her little description at the beginning of the lesson. Now, what was the situation?
Jesus was coming into the city.
Well, true. I'm talking about the little thing at the very beginning where the woman said, "When I was young." That little story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They were applying for a job, an acting job, I believe it was. And the one thought she was more qualified for it, but the other one, that she actually studied for it and was trying to prepare for it, while the other one that didn't study just had a good line of talk, won. And so she was upset.
You know, I found that really interesting because she's writing this from her own perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of important as we look at it. Now, from her perspective, the situation was she believed she was prepared. What did she do that would cause her, what do you think she did that would cause her to assume that she's prepared?
Well, by studying for it.
Okay, study for it.
Prepared for it, meticulously prepared.
Okay. If it is an acting situation, what would be some things ways she could prepare?
Studying whatever they...
She could study what she had for them. If it's acting, would assume that they would have her
Do a dialogue.
do some kind of a dialogue. And so if you were preparing for that, if she said, "I'm meticulously prepared," what would that involve?
The speaking.
Okay.
Met with teachers and mentors.
That she even mentioned that, met with teachers at the school, met with mentors, had contacts, probably worked on her speech, maybe worked the singing with somebody else, might have even had people evaluate or offer suggestions as to how she could do it. So from her perspective, she was prepared, right? Mm-hmm. Now what I find really interesting is when she said, "And Jackson, he didn't."
Nope, you just...
He did. Now, I find that, again, that's from her perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And that, as I was reading it, I really thought, oh, how does she know Jackson didn't prepare?
That's what I was going to just say. How did she know he didn't?
Yeah, that's, how did she know he didn't prepare? Because that's the whole premise at the beginning. I prepared and he didn't. Mm-hmm. How would she know that he didn't prepare?
Probably how he did, well, you
So
know.
he would wing it.
Yeah, that she said, oh, he would just wing it. Why would what would lead her to make that assumption?
That was his lifestyle.
Okay, good. That's probably the way he'd acted in the past. In other words, what would be some characteristics in his lifestyle that she's observed that would cause her to come to that conclusion?
He won instead of her, maybe.
What's that? What would cause her to come to the conclusion that if he is acting like he always acts, he's just showing up? What would be some things that she's observed in him that would cause her to reach that conclusion?
Maybe the way he talked about it.
Okay, maybe the way he's talked about it or other things.
Yeah.
You know, in other situations, he's kind of, I don't worry about it. I'll just show up.
Yeah, his preparation,
Okay, that she's seen him prepare for other things,
which he didn't.
which maybe he didn't, you know, in other situations.
But the thing of it is though, she wasn't with him all the time, she didn't see him all the time, so she has no idea what he did
Right.
on his own.
But she let those assumptions that she had shape her reaction. And so when he gets in and she doesn't, what conclusions? What does she do with that? What are the conclusions she comes to?
He cheated her.
Okay, it's interesting. The first thing he said is he must have cheated.
Oh,
She got bitter.
Yeah, he must have cheated. What else could she have said? And if it's an acting thing, that's pretty hard to cheat, you know.
Yeah.
In acting, it makes it really bad if it was a test that they had to do when she accused him of cheating. That's pretty big. You know, that's worse than, well, he just got lucky. What else?
maybe he was more spontaneous in his, you know, she was so oriented in studying and learning about whatever, and he was spontaneous. He just, what he felt, he was the way he did it. Maybe that made a difference. Especially if they had an interview.
Could have that he was more relaxed and more spontaneous than she was. Could be he was just better.
Could be.
You know, I dated a woman when I was in seminary, and she was at the University of South Carolina, started in piano performance, and the professor came in and said, first day of this plenary, we had about 100 freshman piano majors in a room, and he said, look around. He said, right now, before we even start, first day of class, look around. Look at the other people in this classroom. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that in this class of 100, 5 of you will earn a living playing the piano. 5 of you. If you graduate, 5 of you will earn a living playing the piano. Another 30 of you will really enjoy play part-time, fill in churches, you know. The rest of you will always enjoy the piano, will be fun at parties, but you're not going to make a dime playing the piano. He says, now look around. If you think you're one of the 5 best in this room, stay. If you don't, go to the administration right after class, change your major. Drop the class. Because you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. And I thought, wow, that's pretty dramatic. And the woman I dated, because she played the piano her whole life, of course, dropped the class and changed her major. Because she looked around and she said, I wasn't the best one in this room. You know, I knew I wasn't the best one in this room. So I recognized that I wasn't as good as these other people. So I changed. I thought that was kind of a powerful thing. But, you know, there's a lot of reasons why he could have gotten it. She assumed that he didn't work hard. She assumed he must have cheated, or maybe, you know, he knew somebody. You know, his daddy made a phone call. You know, they paid somebody on the admit board. You know, There must have been something shady going on.
He may have just been a natural too.
He may have been better. You know, he may have been better. Or may have had a really good day.
Yeah.
Don't know. She doesn't know. But she assumed, right?
Yeah.
She assumed he didn't prepare like her, and she assumed he must have gotten in. And what did that do to her?
Devastated her.
Well, it devastated her that she didn't. Okay, now she's jealous because she's devastated because she doesn't get in. But now how does she feel
Bitter.
about Jackson? She is bitter. And how does she direct that at the guy she assumed didn't prepare, not like her, assumed cheated in some way to get in, not like her? How did she treat Jackson?
Not nice.
She didn't treat him very
In
nice.
a sarcastic remark.
Yeah.
And you know, did you ever notice when the difference, you can take 3 people who play the piano, who are good at playing the piano, but 1 out of the 3 makes you feel the music. You know what I mean? And the other 2 are just playing.
Yeah.
They can play, and they can play well, but you don't really feel it as much as someone who really feels the music.
And you have different. I had the opportunity to know 2 people that played the piano professionally. And this is one woman, and she played a little bit. She and I used to go during seminary, we'd go to nursing homes. And I would do a little message, and she would play the piano, and people would sing at the nursing home. So we were singing songs that everybody knew. I mean, we weren't singing complicated stuff. We were singing, but she wanted to know what those songs were. Because she couldn't, she said, I don't sight read well. I got to practice. And I'd have to give her the songs, and she would practice them, and they'd be wonderful. Wonderful. She'd practice them, but she couldn't sight read well. I knew another woman who played the piano at church when I was in Montana, and she said, the first time I sit and play something, it's the best you're going to get. She says, I sight read really, really well, but practice doesn't help me at all. I never get better. This is as good as it's going to be the first time I sit down and play it. And I thought, whoa, that's so much different than the one I dated. I also talked, since she knew music, I talked to her about great pianists. And I used to listen to, if you've ever heard of a guy named Vladimir Horowitz. Vladimir Horowitz.
Putin.
Well, Vladimir Horowitz, yeah, I don't think Putin plays the piano.
Yeah.
Vladimir was a pianist, you know, was really accomplished, died maybe 25 years ago. But he was really, really good. And I asked her, I said, why is he so good? What makes him so good? I guess he must be perfect when he plays. And I remember she laughed at me. And it's related to what she said, he's not perfect. Horowitz makes all kinds of mistakes when he's playing.
Just don't notice it.
He makes all kinds of mistakes. He said, that's not what makes him great. It's not that he plays it perfectly. You can get perfect performances. That's not hard to get a perfect performance. Particularly, you know, with studio recordings, because you play a little bit and they record it, and you play a little bit more, and if it's not good, they discard it, and you play a little, and they sort of piece it together. But he plays these concerts where you can't do that. And she said he makes a lot of mistakes. If you know music, you can hear them. It's not playing it perfect. Somehow he conveys emotion when he's
Yep,
playing.
he feels
He
it.
has
And
to
you
be
feel
filled with that.
Yeah.
In order to provide it.
Right. You can feel what he's playing. She says there's a lot of perfect pianists, but they can't convey emotion, and he can.
Scott can play. He can add to.
Yeah, he does those little embellishes
Yeah.
between verses.
And there's more there than what he's showing us, too.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard he is an excellent pianist.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish he would do more of that here.
Yeah.
And get that out there, because
Yeah.
I think it makes you feel better.
Oh, I think so too. It just convey that fact. Well, in this situation, but she's making all these assumptions that that's not him, right? That's not Jackson. Jackson, you know, doesn't take things seriously, doesn't prepare, gets in by questionable means. She conveys that to him. What does she find out at the end?
But he's a better person than she is.
That he's a pretty nice guy.
Yeah.
You know, that he's a pretty nice guy. And I think that's really interesting. as we to take that little story that she offers as we approach Zacchaeus, because it's easy to sort of approach us as though we're sort of Zacchaeus. But I think it's interesting if we approach him again as a faithful example, but from the perspective of the crowd. Because they're doing this, I think they're doing the same kind of thing with Zacchaeus that this woman did with Jackson. I mean, if you look at the passage, and right at the beginning of chapter 19, it says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Now, Jericho is close to Jerusalem, okay? Where have we heard about Jericho before?
Walls come tumbling down.
Yeah, walls came. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a tumbling down. Jericho is a city close to Jerusalem. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. Okay, now just by that, in those two verses, what do we know about Zacchaeus?
Tax collector.
Tax collector.
And a short man.
He's wealthy. Well, we don't know he's short yet. We're going to get to that in a minute. Right now we know he's a tax collector and we know that he's wealthy. Now, you're there in the crowd. What assumptions are you making about Zacchaeus, this wealthy tax collector?
There's that guy I got to pay taxes to every year.
So you're not happy?
Don't like him.
Don't like it?
Right, Alice?
Yeah. Now, that's not the situation in our society. We like paying taxes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're all excited about participating so that things can happen,
Yeah,
right?
we'll see our tax collector at the end of August.
Yeah, we still don't like tax. They liked them even less back in the day. You know how they collected? First, the Romans are in control, right? Mm-hmm. And the Romans cared about one thing in their empire. Money. That's what they cared about. Money. Money going into Rome.
Yep.
That's what they cared about. Now, they cared about other things, but it was usually related to money. They wanted control. They wanted peace. They wanted prosperity. All of which enabled them to get more money. Okay, so money is a big deal. And the Romans were really sharp in organizing things. Mm-hmm. And when they set up their tax systems, and we're talking about a huge empire, ancient empire, where it's hard to connect to people. That's not as easy. They set up the tax, and they weren't the only people that did it. A lot of societies did this. But instead of the Romans hiring tax collectors and sending them out, hiring tax collectors, that would cost them what? Money, because they have to hire them. They have to send them out, which is going to cost them money. Okay. They've got to protect them, which is going to cost them money. All of them are going to cost them. There's a cheaper way. Instead of hiring our own people. And if a Roman knocks on your door to collect taxes, and you're in Palestine, you're in Judea, a Jew answers the door and a Roman is saying it's time to pay your taxes, how's that Jew going to feel?
Bitter.
Not going to feel bitter, not going to feel good, right? Might be kind of...
Offending.
Yes, offending, yeah. Might sort of hide the money in the back. And so the Roman has got to get somebody to get the money for. There's a better way. Instead of having the Romans, which expose us to a lot of problems, cost us a lot of money, can result in people getting really upset and rioting people don't pay taxes. Instead of doing that, why don't we get the people who live in the area to collect the taxes? So let's get Jews to collect Roman taxes from Jews instead of Italians, right? Speak the same language, we're good. Now, we don't want to have to pay to protect them. We don't want to put them on the salary. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to establish that from every area, a certain amount of money is going to have to come. We're not talking about necessarily like income tax, but we're talking about taxes that should come from a whole area that can be assessed any way the person wants to assess it. Tax collector wants. Now, as long as that tax collector, who's a Jew, and they'll sort of sell it like franchises, as long as the Jew collects his taxes, the taxes that he has to pay us, we're good, right? Well, if the Jew then, if the tax collector collects more than what the Romans want, then the tax collector can keep it. And this is the deal. You can keep whatever you collect above what we want. As long as you send us what we require, you can collect as much as you want. But don't be stupid. Because if you try to collect too much, what's going to happen?
It'll be found out.
You're going to be found out. People are going to get mad. They're going to start rioting. They're not going to pay their taxes. Romans are going to have to send in troops, which costs money, put down the revolt, which costs money, and they're not getting anything back. So if you collect too much, the people are going to rebel. So you got to figure out how much more than we require you can collect, and that's going to be your commission. Now, if that's the deal the Romans have set up, and Zacchaeus is not only is Zacchaeus a tax collector, he's what?
Healthy.
He's chief tax collector, which means what about it?
He's the boss.
He's the boss. He's in charge. Tax collectors, remember we were talking way back right after I came. You were watching The Chosen. And you asked me in a Bible study about Matthew, tax collector. And in The Chosen, he's kind of a nerdy, uncomfortable, weird, kind of a bean counting accountant guy.
Yeah.
And you said, is that really how tax collectors were in the Roman Empire? And I said, absolutely not. You know what tax collectors were like in the Roman Empire?
They had to be knowledgeable.
Well, not only did they have to be knowledgeable, they had to be tough. They were like mafia bosses, collecting money from people that didn't want to pay it. Yeah, they were the ones making an offer you can't refuse. They were tough people because they could get, blood from a stone. That was their job. And since they could collect as much as they wanted, and pocket the extra, they had a reputation of being ruthless, of being crooked. So, right at the beginning of the story, I love this. Right at the beginning of the story, Zacchaeus is a tax collector, and like you said, Alice, he is wealthy, which means
He's rich.
he has pocketed a lot of money.
And he's made a lot of people not like him very well.
Right, that's exactly right. He's pocketed a lot of money. He's gotten, he isn't poor. He isn't like Robin Hood. He isn't collecting only what they require.
I was going to say, if he could collect what he wanted, and he would probably, I don't know if back then what they did, if he did besides throw you in jail if you couldn't pay your taxes. Now, how would that benefit the Romans or Zacchaeus if they were thrown in jail because they didn't have enough money because he charged too much?
Well, that's right. And that's why, but the Romans, that's up to you.
Yeah.
If we have a problem, though, if people stop paying their taxes, you throw people in jail, which means people in jail can't pay, then you still have to give us the money from your area that's due. That's your problem. That's not our problem. So what they didn't want to throw people in jail. They wanted people, therefore you had to decide how much you could collect. What was the line that you could draw? Too much was going to cause you a problem. Too little, you weren't going to be able to pay what is due. You may not be able to earn any kind of a living. So tax collectors were smart in that they had to determine exactly how much they could collect. And tax collectors had little goons. They'd hire muscle men to make sure people paid their taxes. They weren't knocking on the door and handing them a little piece of paper. They had two guys behind them. named Rocco, both of them, saying, you've gotten attached to your thumbs. Would you like to keep them? So this is the assumption as we approach this story is we are looking at a guy who is not a good guy, right? And we have all kinds of reasons to make that assumption because tax collectors are not really nice guys. And tax collectors who are wealthy must have been ripping off people for years. And to make matters even worse, who are they working for? They're working for the Romans. They aren't working for us. The money we're paying in taxes isn't going to our people. It's going to Italy. It's being put on a boat and sailing to Italy. It'd be like a foreign country started collecting taxes here. We don't like paying taxes, but if, China were collecting taxes here, we'd like it even less. And we'd like the Americans who are collecting it even less because they are traitors. So Zacchaeus, there is nothing good in that description of Zacchaeus. And then we get to the next verse. It says he wanted to see Jesus, but because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd. This guy is a wealthy tax collector who is short. Now, why might short lead to certain conclusions? Why might a person be short? And we're talking about in this ancient world, to an ancient people. Why would being short create an issue?
Because he couldn't see over everybody.
Well, couldn't see over anybody, right?
I know, that's all.
All right. Why are people short and nowadays? If we see a short person, not that it applies to anybody in this room,
Right.
but if we see a short person, what do we assume?
They're not very tall.
Yeah.
You know something?
Which glad you
I attended after high school, college, or seminary for 10 years. And I am now at a place where when I ask, what do we assume? Why do we think a person is short? The answer is because they're not tall.
It's true.
Yes, it is.
Pretty plain.
100% true. But not the one here was.
10 years, 40 years in the church. All right, okay, we're good. But wait a minute, because I was trained to be a teacher, and one thing teachers have to do is part of what we are. Good answer. Yeah, good answer. Anything else?
Genetics.
Okay, we would say genetics, right?
Yeah.
We'd say
Poor nutrition.
maybe poor nutrition. We'd say we'd give it a physical reason, right?
Category.
A category, and it wouldn't be the fault of the person who's short, right? That's how they were born.
Yeah.
But we talk about an ancient world, right? So they don't know about genetics, right?
They don't know about nutrition.
They don't know the details of nutrition. So you got a short person. Why is that person short? Maybe. Is it preferable to be short? Is that an advantage in...
Not back then, because there
Not
were so
back-
many crowds.
Yeah, there were crowds and, you're working. They're working. It's hard to live. We people who are short, we have short arms. And, we don't move quite as fast or as far as others. Yeah, we have to weave and crawl underneath people and stuff. That maybe being short is kind of a curse. Yeah, it's a hindrance. Maybe there's something going on in the background. Maybe God has caused that person to have this disability, this shortness of disability. So, as we look at Zacchaeus, Now, again, from our 21st century eyes, that's fine, he's just short. That explains where it's. But for ancient people, this guy there's nothing good yet presented about Zacchaeus. He's a tax collector, which means he's a traitor. He's wealthy, which means he's been ripping off people. And he is short, which means there must be something wrong with his family. Right? What's the assumption?
All of the above.
All of the above. Not a very good guy. You want to be around him? Heck no. What does Zacchaeus do?
Climbs a tree.
He climbs a tree. Why does he climb a tree?
So you can see.
Because that gives him the opportunity to see. Right?
Okay, what kind of a tree does he climb?
What kind of tree does he climb?
Sycamore fig.
Sycamore tree.
Sycamore
Okay.
fig.
I didn't know what they grew over there.
Yeah, he climbs a sycamore tree. And so he can see. And when Jesus comes to the place, he looks up and saw him and says to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house. So he came down and at once welcomed him gladly. You're in the crowd. What are you thinking?
Oh my, he's going with a tax collector.
With a sinner.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesus is going with a sinner, right?
Yeah.
Which must mean
He's a sinner.
there's something wrong with Jesus. Maybe he's a sinner.
It would attack his credibility a little.
Attack his his credibility. And Zacchaeus, at best, Jesus doesn't realize what a disgusting human being Zacchaeus is. Because that's what we, as members of the crowd,
Thought.
assume.
But-
That's what we assume, right? Because that's, by outward appearances, that is Zacchaeus.
Well, Jesus knew. So, we know that now, but, Jesus knew who he was.
Well, but we're not Jesus, right? We're just part of the crowd.
Okay.
All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be a guest of a sinner. Now, when you read scripture, we just have words, right? We don't know how those words are said, right? In other words, we don't know if, when it was written, the intention was all the people began to mutter, he's going to be a guest with a sinner. Which would mean what?
They don't.
How dare he? Who does he think, Jesus think he is, going with a sinner? That must show something terrible about him. Or, he is going to be a guest with a sinner?
Yep.
Which would reflect shock or confusion? Question? We don't know. We just got words, right? Either way, based on the assumption the crowds have made about Zacchaeus, this just ain't cool. This just ain't
Oh,
cool.
just like the beginning story.
Just like the beginning story. And that's when I find that story really interesting. Because it's all the assumptions that she starts making about Jackson. And she didn't know whether they're true. All the assumptions that crowd is making about Zacchaeus, that we know they're making because that's what they say in verse 7, they don't know whether it's true. And in fact, as the story goes on, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to Jesus, look, and this is before he even goes home, look, Lord, here I am, and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to your house, because this man too is the son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So, all those assumptions those people made about Zacchaeus, based on all those factors they looked at from his past and present, how did they relate to the man who is standing before Jesus?
They
How
didn't
does-
approve.
What's that?
They didn't approve.
The crowd didn't approve. How did Zacchaeus, all those assumptions, were those assumptions right? That Zacchaeus is a disgusting, lousy, cheating, lying son of a gun.
They believed it to be true because they didn't really know what was going on.
They didn't know. They didn't know. They didn't know
They
Zacchaeus.
assumed that he was a really bad person.
And you know something that's interesting? He could have been. But standing there, he wasn't. You know, because he does say, half the possessions to the poor, if I cheated anything out of anybody, I'll get 4 times, which would indicate
He did.
he may have. You know, he may have cheated people out of it. But that's what tax collectors do, and that's what they assume. They didn't know him, right? And they didn't know what he was, his potential, what he could be. Who did?
Jesus.
Jesus did. And in fact, you know, he even says not only that salvation has come, but that this guy's a
Good person.
child of Abraham, which means he's a good person. He's one of you. He's part of the chosen people. And in fact, it's the Zacchaeuses of the world that Jesus came to save. It's the Zacchaeus. It's the ones who are excluded, the ones that people assume are worthless. They're the ones.
What's that expression about assume?
Oh, we don't want to, yeah.
say
We
that.
probably don't want to go with what, you break the word assume down, the word down.
What I was gonna say.
Yeah, oh, okay, I'm sorry.
When you point your finger at one person, you have,
Oh, good, yes, oh, yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you thought.
That's exactly what I thought you were going to say. And that's why I didn't want to have it
I know.
on tape. But we love you, Shelley. We do. We love you. It's so much fun.
I can't keep my mouth shut.
No, you're great. I think if other things have reminded us of examples we can follow, of faith that we can apply to ourselves, this may be a good example. Certainly we can be like Zacchaeus. We can choose to change. We're not bound to whatever past we have. You know, when confronted with Jesus, we can become something different. And we can do that by choice because Zacchaeus does it by choice. He chooses to do that. You know, he doesn't choose to give all of his stuff. It's only half. And he's only paying 4 times what he's cheated people. So, but I kind of like that because, you know, we have the story of the rich young ruler where he says, sell everything. You know, so Zacchaeus, you know, I kind of like Zacchaeus. You know, so we have the potential of change. We also might want to be really careful as we look out at other folks to start making a lot of assumptions, which we're going to do anyway, because that's how we function. We got to do it. We can't. We got to make assumptions, or we'll be falling into all kinds of problems.
These first two things.
Questions.
Yes, they really speak the way it is. I mean, you don't know, if you have the temptation put in front of you and nobody's gonna see you take that, take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Are you going to, or are you not?
You know,
Sorry.
that's. You know what I find really interesting as I look, and this story ends, and now we're off on something else. I mean, in Luke. What I'd love to hear is, what did the people there do after verse 10? What did they do after verse 10? We don't know, because it goes into another story. We're at another story.
I would assume
You
the
know.
crowd sort of broke up and were going about themselves mumbling and.
Yeah, that's it. What are they mumbling? You know, are they saying, oh, that's Zacchaeus. We misjudged him. What a wonderful, you know, he really wasn't as bad as we thought he was. Or, oh, that Zacchaeus, he was a terrible person, but now he's changed. He's turned over a new leaf. I will now trust him. Or were they saying,
Is he for real?
yeah, is he for real?
Is he for real? Or is it
Words,
just an act?
words are cheap. I know he cheated me. Let's see if he pays me back 4 times.
Give him time to
Yeah.
test him.
I just, which would mean the assumptions they carried, they wouldn't necessarily be giving up unless they choose to do it.
Is he really at face value?
That's exactly right. Or are we going to base it on
His past.
everything else we've seen? Everything else we've seen. Now, that then becomes a challenge, really a challenge for us. You know, do we in the face of situations that force us to question our assumptions, are we willing to allow those assumptions to change? Or are we going to say, well, this change must be fake, and my assumptions are all right, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. Therefore, I'm not going to change at all. And that, to me, that really becomes a question that is sort of lurking behind the whole story of Zacchaeus. Really calls into question, the faith that we have. Can we trust that God can change someone? Or are we going to be governed by the assumptions, permanently governed by the assumptions that we make?
Just trust what Jesus says, because I have seen some people and had felt that it was a certain thing, and it turns out later that it wasn't.
Yeah.
That person was totally different than what I was.
When I was working on that, I was thinking, I'm looking at you, Barb, about Hallmark movies. How often in Hallmark movies, this is exactly what happens in Hallmark movies. Not a few Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
No, every Hallmark movie. This is what people make assumptions.
Yes.
They act on their assumptions. The assumptions end up being wrong. They have a hard time changing. In fact, they don't change. They assume that what they saw in the past is still valid, and then at the end, they somehow they come together and their assumptions are questions, and life goes on and everything is wonderful. And that's really kind of what's going on here. That same thing. Are we willing to sort of surrender those assumptions when we're faced with the presence and glory of God? Hard thing, but a hard thing to do. Hard thing to do. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to look at your word. Remind us that certainly we can be like Zacchaeus regardless of our past. We can make a decision to change. That's what repentance is all about. It's about changing. And remind us that we can do that. Also remind us that as we look at folks, help us to be careful before we put those assumptions we make in concrete. In other words, help us to look out at the world and particularly at other people, and recognize that grace is a powerful thing, and lives can certainly be changed, and some of the things we assume just might not be right. Help us to have that kind of openness within ourselves. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so thank you.